Welcome to the Women's Money Wisdom Podcast. I'm Melissa Joy, a certified financial planner and the founder of Pearl Planning. My goal is to help you streamline and organize your finances, navigate big money decisions with confidence, and be strategic in order to grow your wealth. As a woman, you work hard for your money, and I'm here to help you make the most of it. Now, let's get into the show. Just a quick note before we dive in. The information that we share is meant to educate and inspire, not to serve as personalized financial advice. Everyone's situation is unique, so be sure to consult with your own financial professional for guidance that fits your life. And just so you know, the opinions shared in this podcast are my own and those of my guest, and they don't necessarily represent those of any organizations that I'm affiliated with. For more important disclosures, please go to our webpage at pearlplan.com. Now, let's get started. I know that estate planning might not be your favorite topic. In fact, I find it to be one of the topics that clients put off the most and like to discuss the least. And yet it is so important. We remember and know that based on everyday practices. So I have a really fun guest today who is going to talk about estate planning based on cautionary tales and celebrity gossip. Jenny Rozelle is an estate planner who is based in Indiana, and she is the owner of a firm and practices estate and elder law as an attorney at Indiana Estate and Elder Law. She wears many hats, but one of the best features of Jenny is that she talks like an everyday person about a topic that she's passionate about that many of us don't know a lot about. You can find her on social media, on Twitter, I'll never call it X, or LinkedIn. And today, Jenny's just going to talk, that regular way and give us some reasons that we should look again at estate planning. Jenny, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. And I'll try to bring the fun, as much fun as we can have when it talks about incapacity and dying. I'm a big believer in if you try to make the conversation fun, maybe more people will actually end up doing it.
It's so true. And just being relatable, because I think perfection is the enemy of progress when it comes to estate planning, because it's so difficult to have exactly the right game plan. But if you don't have something that is functional and working, like, you're really up a creek, which is kind of what we want to talk about today. Like, what if you don't do something? What if you assume that what you plan to do is something that you could just kind of get around the bounds of the law? That's really what you talk about so much when it comes to your communication and sharing with a broader audience.
Yeah, I think that where my head just went when you just said that is, I think when people hear that word estate planning, they tend to put it off for a whole bunch of different reasons. But one of the reasons being that, I'll just get to that when I'm older. I'll get to that when I retire, or, when I'm much older in life. And that is a grave mistake that people make all the time. And unfortunately, life is so very precious. And I meet and help families navigate some pretty yucky situations, which sometimes involve, people in their 30s and 40s that have like a massive medical event. And so what I would encourage people to remember is that estate planning, really from a place of like making sure that your T's are crossed and I's are dotted, you should start on estate planning probably sooner than a lot of people think. I help a lot of young families navigate getting some basic documents in place just to make sure like guardianship provisions are in there, just in case something were to happen to them. We want to make sure the kiddos are taken care of. All the way up to people in their 90s and 100 that, have maybe done the estate planning rodeo multiple times at that point. And so estate planning is just one of those things that you really should get a jump start as early as possible, and just let that plan grow with you as your life changes and your family changes, your assets change, all that good stuff.
It's so true. And I was just thinking about it, even like when you send your kids off to college, they're an adult typically, once they're 18, that might be the first point in time where you have a document that's they're signing. You're not telling them what to do. You may be encouraging them and say, if this is okay, sign on the dotted line. you do a lot of education, and this is kind of a teaser this episode for your podcast, the Legal Tea Podcast, which we'll have a link to in the show notes and would recommend everybody like, follow, subscribe. And you, as we were getting ready for the show, you mentioned that your cautionary tale episodes are the most popular episodes that you have. What were the ones that really like just everybody was sharing with their friends?
Yeah, so cautionary tales are episodes that I talk about like real life clients, real life stories that I have worked on. And I think that they're so frequently listened to um because I think people find them more relatable. They're, the everyday people. They're our neighbors, they're our friends that this kind of stuff happens to. Some of my, I don't want to even say favorite cautionary tales because that seems very oxymoronic, but
Most important. Yeah.
yes. A couple of them that come to mind. One is beneficiary designations. In your and I's field, Melissa, we see so many people mess up on beneficiary designations. And what a lot of people don't know and understand is beneficiary designations trump what your estate plan states. And so if there's a conflict between a beneficiary on, say, like a retirement account or a life insurance policy versus what your will or trust may say, that beneficiary designation is going to win. And so one of the classic stories that I've talked about on the podcast or my podcast before was I worked on a case that the gentleman passed away about 3 or 4 years ago, and he left his ex-spouse listed as beneficiary on his retirement account and life insurance policy. And a lot of people would think, oh, well, she was the ex, so she doesn't get anything. No, that's not the case. Those funds went to his ex-spouse. What was kind of the even more funky part of that story was that he did have a child, and that child was not her child.
Hers.
But that the relationship between him and his child, very strained, very, very strained. They didn't talk for a number of years. And so when she lawyered up to try to go after those funds from the ex-spouse, the ex-spouse's lawyer was like, well, how do you know that that he didn't want these funds to go to her? And so, one of my husband, who's also an attorney, he always says estate planning documents are easy. It's the people, the relationships, and personalities. When they get involved, that's when things go a little funky. So that's what I talk about on Cautionary Tales, or all those funky stories that I work on that happen more often than I think people think.
Yeah, I as you were describing those beneficiary designations, I was thinking about a time where we pulled up a beneficiary designation for a client with a multi-million-dollar estate, and it was his dead mother who was listed as his beneficiary on his very first 401k. He was very proud because it was kind of a special consulting firm 401k that had some fancy investments, and is like, well, that's great, but your mom's been deceased for more than 25 years and you've been married for more than 25 years. And so sometimes I find people keep things a little more complicated because they want to, kind of diversify based on location in terms of their accounts. And I just always know that there's a greater potential for, kind of mistakes or accidents when you have accounts all over the place or you don't frequently log in because it's kind of fix it and forget it. So yes, definitely like please pull up your beneficiary designations, not just for your big current 401k, but all those little accounts or life insurance policies that you typically don't look at so that you know exactly what's in there.
I always tell people, it's a perfect time to say this, that I can confirm as an estate attorney that there is not some big brother out there that when you pass away, that I can like secretly pull all your assets. So when you talk about, simplifying your all your financials, all of your assets, the more organized and simplified you are, the less likely something's going to get missed or messed up. And there's a lot of accounts that end up going to unclaimed property, especially retirement accounts that don't get rolled over and all that sort of good stuff. So yeah, I can confirm there's no big brother out there, people. That doesn't exist.
Do your work. You're this is something where financial adulting is absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
Another area where I think people get surprised, and I'm assuming you have a ton of cautionary tales, is like, the first thing if you're less educated and typical American thinking about estate planning is like, okay, well, I need a will, which typically necessitates probate in most states. Can you talk about some cautionary tales about those who are just like, yep, probate sounds good to me because I'll be dead. It's not my problem.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, two things come to mind. One, when there's a whole lot of people that pass away without a will, and there's these funky laws called intestacy laws or intestacy rules that are a built-in estate plan for individuals that die without a will. And in my experience, they are not typically what you would want to have happen with assets. So be very mindful of that. Don't bank on your state laws to have your back on what your estate plan should look like.
So, for an example, would that be like the spouse gets a portion, but not all, and then other relatives are also in the mix and things like that?
Yeah, so a perfect example, I'm licensed in Indiana, so, people will say, "Oh, when I pass away, it'll all go to my spouse." And what those intestacy rules say is if you die without a will and you have a spouse and you also have kids, half goes to your spouse and half goes to your kids. And so a lot of people are like, wait, what? Why would it not all go to your spouse? I'm like, I don't know. Talk to our legislators. That's just what the intestacy rules state. So that's a perfect example of what I mean of not banking on those rules to save the day. Um, and then from the other side, so say someone does do a will. I always, I'm one of those people that I really truly don't believe that there's like this one size fits all estate plan. Like I'm a firm believer that not every single person needs, a trust in this world. There are a lot of attorneys that do believe that. I don't. And, I come from a place of education of, okay, if we do just a last will and testament, what people have to understand is if the assets that are passing through that will, every state has like a probate threshold. So like if I use my state, Indiana, for example, our probate threshold is $100,000. So if the assets passing through the will exceed $100,000, we're going through the probate court process. Every state's probate court process is ever so slightly different. Some states are a nightmare come true. Their probate process is awful. Some states probate's not too terrible. But what I always tell people are there are three non-negotiables about probate, regardless of the estate. There's time. What I mean by time is it's not going to happen overnight. Realistically, in Indiana, at least, I set the expectation it's going to take about a year.
And
Um,
sometimes more. I have an
yep.
estate in Michigan where I think we're in the third calendar year,
Oh yeah, the longest
trying to
one I ever
close.
worked on was 6 years.
Ugh,
So there's no
yikes.
maximum. So number one non-negotiable is time. So if that's a concern for people to like make sure things are handled very efficiently and quickly, well then maybe probate is not going to be your cup of tea. The other two quick non-negotiables are cost, and specifically the legal fees associated with those. It cracks me up when lawyers are like, "Oh, the probate costs." I'm like, "It's the legal fees. Let's just call it what it is."
Yeah,
Um, your executor has to hire a lawyer, and so we've kind of monopolized that market in a way. And then the last non-negotiable is public record. Anytime you're going through the court system, it's public record. So if someone wants things to be handled very privately, that's another, notch in the let's not go through probate column.
absolutely. I agree. And as you were talking through that cautionary tale of, just, okay, who gets what? And you mentioned the kids. Do you have any cautionary tales about people inheriting unconstricted money at a young age, like, you know, 18 or 19-year-old? Any lessons learned on that?
Yeah, so two that just pop into my one, definitely with that. I had a case where there was a beneficiary that was on Medicaid. And unfortunately, the person that her mom passed away. And it is very easy to add in language into wills and trusts to support beneficiaries that are on benefits like Medicaid. But we did not do her plan. I should make that crystal clear. And her will didn't have that language in it. And so the beneficiary inherited her share of the estate. She got kicked off of Medicaid. Medicaid is a beast to apply for and to get approved for. And so it honestly really stunk for her, because she got this money that could have otherwise been protected against Medicaid. But then once she got through it, 'cause she had to spend it all down, at that point, then she had to reapply, which was pretty terrible. The other thing that I was thinking of, another good cautionary tale real case was, if we use those intestacy rules, as that example, what I said earlier, there was a case that I worked on a few years ago that person passed away and half went to his spouse and half went to his kids. And the next chapter in the story is that the kids were like, oh, that was clearly an oversight by dad. We want our share to go to mom. And, a lot of people will be like, oh, good, happily ever after. Oh, no, 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 no. So once they received the share of dad's estate, they wanted to gift their share back to mom, who he probably would have wanted things to go to. But what a lot of people don't realize is there's so many things in estate planning world that it's just a bigger thing than people think it is. And so when they gifted things back to mom, we immediately had gift tax considerations. And so they thought they were doing the right thing, and they probably were doing the right thing, but it was kind of one of those, oh, not so fast. Like, it's a longer conversation than you just signing over your share of the estate back over to mom. So that's another good one.
Yeah, I've seen I've got minor kids, so the guardian is going to be my brother. So then I'll just leave everything to my brother. No.
No.
A lot of just it'll be simpler this way that just doesn't functionally work because it's very difficult once something's in your name. You cannot eliminate your responsibility, for example, for taxes as well as for, gift considerations. And so you've just left a big burden for somebody else.
Yeah. And my brain, and maybe it's just because my brain is trained to be cynical, but in that example, one, the brother doesn't have to spend it on the kids. Sure, he may be guardian, but he could be like, oh, thanks, I'm resigning as guardian and I'm taking this money and going to Vegas.
Or their spouse could do the same. Might be marital property.
Totally. And not to mention what happens if that brother passes away, and then it's going to sister-in-law or whoever. So things can get messy really quickly, just so very quickly. And I wish it could be easier. I really wish it could be easier because I think that would encourage more people to get their estate plans done. But it's just not. There's just a lot of things to consider, and just making sure your ducks in a row and get things done right from the beginning.
I also think in terms of cautionary tale, there's that assumption if our health starts to diminish or when we get older, you mentioned it at the beginning of the episode, we'll get a more organized estate plan. We can just do the basics in the beginning. And what I see is in terms of capacity, people can still have very independent capacity, but a lower ability to make decisions or be decisive. And putting things off often means that either unsolicited advice is coming from other members of the family or there's more potential for conflict, less ability to communicate effectively about what you want. So
yeah, amen to what you just said. I mean, it's one of those things, and I see it all the time, Melissa, where that exact scenario happens, and then whoever the older person is, let's call it mom or dad or whoever, typically they go into complete analysis paralysis because they have all these people in their ear, including the estate attorney, right? I mean, there's some people in their ear that's good people to have in their ear. But it's, they're at this point in their life where they're they're realizing that, their health is starting to decline, even if it's just ever so slightly. And then they got all these people talking to them about all this different stuff. And then they're just like, I'm done. I'm closing, I'm closing off, and their walls go up, and then they don't move. They don't
Yes.
move on anything. And so, and then typically what ends up happening, you and I both see this, I'm certain, that they don't move. And then 11th hour planning, something is like 911 emergency. And that's when they're boomeranging back to me. And you're typically paying someone like me more at that point, because we are having to prioritize and get them, documents done, rushed. And it's just, it's a stinky position to be in.
Yeah, no need for stink when it comes to estate planning.
Yeah.
I think a lot of those stories too are, they're cautionary tales, but with a celebrity twist. So you also do episodes because there is this lack of privacy when it comes to many parts of estate planning. While you do have the opportunity to protect yourself, many celebrity estates don't have the proper estate planning in order to protect themselves. What are some stories that you pulled up that have really, kind of resonated or stick with you when it comes to celebrity estate plan and legalty?
Yeah, I think the two that pop into my head immediately, one was Aretha Franklin. And I think a lot of people
I mean, we're based in Michigan,
oh
so
gosh,
absolutely
yes.
that's like top of mind. And
Yep.
I've read all the Detroit Free Press stories about it and
Oh
stuff like
yes.
that.
Yeah. So I think the thing people need to remember about celebrities is they are humans too, that have a lot of the same issues as we do as everyday people. So Aretha Franklin's family setup was a little unique. I think she had 4 kids. One with special needs. But very long story short, in her estate, they ended up finding like multiple wills in her house.
Like written in pencil, right? Like just sitting
Yes.
around the house.
One was found in her couch cushion, and little insider secret, that's the one that they ended up finding as the valid will, which happened to write out, like disinherit that special needs son. Um, and so, the lesson learned there is let's not try to write our own will, and especially let's not try to keep it uh in a couch cushion. That's not a secure place. Um, and then the other one that popped into my brain was Kobe Bryant. He actually had a very good estate plan. He had set up a trust to support his spouse and his kiddos. But what I said earlier is so true with him, where when I said that, celebrities have the same exact issues as we do. So his slip up was he had an awesome estate plan, but his death occurred like, don't quote me on this, but like 6 months, maybe less than a year after his youngest daughter had been born. So he had not updated his estate plan to include that youngest daughter. And so Vanessa, his wife, had to get the court involved to basically like ask the court to include the youngest daughter as part of his estate plan, which is just a great reminder that, estate planning is not a one-time thing. I wish it was a one-time thing. But like in Kobe's estate plan, he probably thought he had more time. He probably knew he needed to get, because he had updated his trust every time after a new child, and he just
Did
did
the
not.
trust include provisions saying you additional heirs
No.
could be okay?
I'd have to say no, because she had to get the court, because
Yeah,
if it had said that, she wouldn't have had to get the court
right.
involved. But
That is a
yeah.
typical, like if you're like listening and like, oh my gosh, am I okay?
Yeah.
Many trusts, which are very effective when you have issues of guardianship as well as minor children. I'm a huge advocate of like age 18 should not be
Yeah.
the day that you get $1 million
Amen.
in a bank account with your full control. And so many documents, at least, are typically written with consideration for additional heirs. But if you're a celebrity where you might be concerned about, false accusations of
Yeah.
paternity, that
Yeah.
might be a reason that you would be skeptical and want to name them one at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. I never came across that in my research, but that would make a lot of sense because another little plug, I think it was Prince or Michael Jackson. I can't remember which one, but there were a ton of people that came out of the woodwork in one of theirs estate to say like, oh, I'm the long lost sibling or long lost child. And there was all this, DNA testing that had to be done to confirm or deny, I should say, because I don't think any of them were actually related. But great point. That's like very likely why he did that.
Well, and just thinking about these tales, in both cases, they paid attorneys. Because I know in the Aretha Franklin case, there was a team who were her attorneys, but there is, I always think of the concept of 100 and 100 when it comes to financial planning, estate planning, so many professional engagements. It's up to both of you. And if
Mm-hmm.
you have a team that you're paying, but you don't follow through on executing documents, if you're not clearly communicating, if you're doing things on the side, there's a there's a limit as a professional to how much you can
Wow.
come and save the day when you either don't know, don't have full cooperation, meetings keep getting canceled or rescheduled and things like that.
Yeah.
So I kind of sometimes measure the estate planners I work with who, full disclosure, aren't Jenny because you need to work with someone in your
Yeah.
state. So it's
Yep.
important in terms of location, what they specialize in. It should be the state you live in. And then also, hear so many times like, oh, my dad's best friend is an attorney, and you have no idea what type of law they practice, and they'll do you a favor. You might save a little money, but it might cost you in the long run. So, it's just so important to have the right person on the team and follow through. So, some attorneys, I feel like maybe they don't create a process that makes it more effective follow through because it's kind of on you
Yeah.
to like follow up. And so, the batting average of executed documents is one of the things I measure.
Yeah. 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 I think that one of my favorite sayings in the world is you can lead someone to the water, but it's up to them to drink it. And I couldn't agree with you more that there's, um, people like you and I can only take people so far, and then it's up to them to really take the baton, and we'll help them carry it, but we can't be the only one that carries it. And that's so true with both of our perspectives from financial and estate planning. It's so very true.
Well, speaking of that, there's so much demand for estate planning. I bet like more than half of our audience listening is like, oh, there's something I should tweak. I think, and this is like, I don't know the answer is 100% true, but I think you've commented on digital services that include estate planning. So you probably have heard commercials for Trust and Will if you're a listener. Celebrities are endorsing that type of
Hmm.
more simplified estate planning. A tool that financial advisors use is Vanilla as well as wealth.com. What are your thoughts? Because I'm curious to hear yours and then I'll share mine.
Yeah, I am like a unicorn in the legal profession. I feel like everything I say and do tends to be the opposite of what most attorneys say and do, which, you know what, it bodes well for me. So I'm just going to keep owning it. I come from a place of I will forever be an advocate for getting documents in the hands of more people. There's absolutely no excuse for the statistic, I think it's like 50% or greater of people that die without an estate plan. There's so many, there's even like services out there that will do estate planning for free for very low income and very low asset folks. And so I think what these services are offering are for just more access, and I'm going to be an advocate for that. What I would say is what I would want people to know and understand is utilizing those services. You just have to understand that you're sacrificing the level of counseling and accountability, like we were just talking about, and relationship that an attorney is going to be able to give to you. And so, again, coming from a place of education and not like a fear tactic, is as long as people understand that piece, then if they elect to go through a service like that, then do it to it. Um, Otherwise, if they're like, you know what, I do value a relationship. I do value, more hand holding. I do value that sort of stuff. Then maybe you do need to look into going through an attorney. But yeah, I'm fine with them. I'm totally fine with them. But I know a lot of attorneys are like, man, they're so bad.
I see. I have a attorney friend who I've mentioned, hey, we have a subscription to one of the services, and I just saw her eyes bug out, just like you're evil. And to me, I mean, always start with like, I want you to call an attorney as a follow up to this conversation,
Yep.
and in most locations, because I have clients around the country, we can find somebody.
Yep.
There are some cases where I can't because, it's just like beyond my scope. And it's also
Yeah.
not my responsibility to find the estate planner. And in some cases, I've given the name like 3 years in a row and we're still sitting with no documents and like very real estate planning needs as well as, amounts of money in the estate. And in
Yeah.
that case, I'm like, absolutely, it would be better to have something versus nothing. And
Yeah.
I'll still advocate for you to, have the nuance of a plan with an attorney. And in other cases, especially if you have a more complex estate, picking up the phone to an estate planning attorney who's used to dealing with people with 10 to 20 million in assets when you're a new client, they may not have time for you the first week. And
Mm-hmm.
if
Yeah.
you have minor children or close to a taxable estate, like I think those documents might be better as a placeholder until you get the appointment. I mean, a lot of times it could take 6 months to get documents in place, depending on how
Yeah.
long you take to decide and
Yeah.
and the attorney's availability. So it's
Yeah.
not all black and white. And the same goes with,
Yes.
investments and financial services as well. So
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to say it is there's no black and white. And as long as people are educated in their decisions, from there, that's their decision. It's not my decision. It's not your decision. It's their decision. And I just come from a place of I'll educate you of what, the options are. And from there, it's your decision to make. So yeah,
well,
I
those
have a little bit of
services
a
they are certainly not going to eliminate the need for attorneys in the world. And I would
yes.
love the percentage of people that have documents in place to be higher.
Yes, yes, exactly. And that's exactly why I'm fine with it. I'm like it's getting those services are getting documents in the hands of more people and that there's no denying that. So, yeah.
Well, as we wrap up, I want to make sure, again, people check out your podcast, the Legal Tea Podcast. And also, you wrote a chapter in a book from an author who we had as a guest on the podcast. Also, Christine Benz, who wrote a fantastic book called How to Retire. How have you been hearing from people reading the chapter? Because I loved it. And I was like, oh my gosh, another podcast guest.
I
So
know.
fun.
Yes, I've had so many people comment, both like publicly and privately. They'll send me messages. I even had my brother-in-law's mom text me because either Christine or her book was on some TV show. I should have looked it up. But my brother-in-law's mom was like, "Is this you?" Because they were like mentioning like who contributed to some of the chapters, and I was like, "Yep, that's me." So yeah, it fantastic book. She's a fantastic lady. I could not be more honored to be in her book.
Well, Jenny, I loved your chapter. And that book is great. It's a great gift for anybody pondering retirement, early into retirement, because it's so multifunctional. Every chapter is from a different point of view about retirement. Some of it's about how are you going to spend your time? Make sure your legal affairs are in order. What about the taxes? Things
Very
like that.
holistic.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like that's going to have a lot of legs and you'll be running into people who've read your chapter for years to come.
Maybe I should start getting ready for some autographs.
There you go. If we ever see each other in person, I'll have my book with me.
Oh, perfect.
Well, where can people find you if they want to continue to hear your authentic and relatable voice when it comes to estate planning?
Yeah, professionally, people are welcome to check out my website, indianaestateelderlaw.com. But I'm a little bit more informal on my Twitter. Yes, it's always going to be Twitter. Elon
Yes.
Musk may
I
come at me,
refuse
but
to change.
I don't like change. I'm on there quite often. I love contributing content out on that platform, as well as, of course, my podcast, which I try to make this whole estate and elder law space the content delivered in a fun way, and not in this like Charlie Brown's teacher. That was the lady. Yeah, like the opposite of that. That's what I'm aiming for. So yeah, any of those outlets.
Well, I think you're nailing it with what you're aiming for. You're hitting the bullseye. And Jenny, we're so glad to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Women's Money Wisdom Podcast. If you found value in this episode, the best way you can support the podcast is to forward an episode to a friend or leave a review. Go to pearlplan.com and the podcast link to get all the resources and links mentioned.